Well, let me, Bert, are you ready for? Okay. You ready? Welcome. Well, the turnout today suggests to me that you think this topic is as important as I think that it is. I think it's a really critical topic for us. Let me just say a word about this week. This has been a very special and busy week for us in a very positive way. We have a group of nurses with us this week from SAMHSA. They are SAMHSA fellows. They're all nurses who are working on their doctorate, and some of them have their doctorates. So there are about 22 of them. You may have seen them around. Dr. Newmark will meet with them later this afternoon. Monday night, we were at the Carter Center where we co-sponsored a session on the soloist. So how many of you have seen the movie The Soloist? If you get a chance to see it. Actually, the purpose was to really examine the movie from a neuroscience perspective. So we teamed up with Emory University neuroscientists and the Carter Center, and really had quite an evening discussing that. To our surprise, Nathaniel Ayers really came, and he played some of his music, and Steve Lopez, of course, who wrote the book, was there. So it was quite an evening. We had about 300 people, and then, of course, tonight we will have the NFL huddle, communities looking at how we can improve mental health and prevent the trauma that often leads to mental illness. This is the first. We're going to do 30 cities throughout this country where there are retired NFL players, many of whom have suffered early dementia. But we're taking a broader approach to it from the standpoint of what this says about mental health and mental illness, and what we can do to begin to intervene to prevent either traumatic mental disorders or other forms of mental illness. But today is special because I have for a long time been concerned about the fact that when we talk about mental disorders and mental illness, we don't talk much about prevention and health promotion as we do with other things like cardiovascular disease and cancer. But I think it's time for us to really make that transition, to really begin to think about what we can do to promote mental health and prevent mental illness. Dr. Newmark has been a leader in looking at the emotional needs of children and really working with parents and teachers and communities to try to get us to really focus on what is it that children need from us. What is it that we can do to help develop healthy children emotionally and otherwise. Now, I have a written introduction, and Renee tells me I need to read it because I'm not going to cover some things that some of you may be interested in, so I'm going to try to do that rapidly. Dr. Newmark's focus for several decades has been on people. He has experienced at every level of education, from elementary school to university, as a teacher, consultant, researcher. He's lectured extensively throughout the world. In all of these venues, he has really captivated audience with his ability to connect with all cultures and groups and penetrate quickly to the heart of this very vital subject. In a straightforward, non-technical way, he conveys this information, as you will see. Presently, he's president of the Children's Project, a non-profit organization co-founded with his wife, Deborah, who's standing back in the doorway, and you probably met her when you were coming in. Their focus is on developing emotionally healthy children, families, schools, communities, and cities. Through the Children's Project, over 390,000 copies of the book, How to Raise Emotionally Healthy Children, Meeting the 5 Critical Needs of Children and Parents Too. This book has been translated into Spanish, Hungarian, Hebrew, German, Russian, and in the USA in Braille. And a new translation soon to appear in China, India, and Japan. And we talked yesterday about working together to get it more in terms of DVDs and using the internet more so. We're looking forward to working with him. Previously, for the 15 years, he was a human factors scientist, first with the RAND Corporation and later the Systems Development Corporation. There his work focused on the design, development, and evaluation of innovative training and instructional systems for military programs and public schools. Under a 7-year Ford Foundation grant, Dr. Newmark worked with children, parents, and teachers in Los Angeles in the Unified School District as co-director of a project to develop a model school. The results of this effort are described in his book, This School Belongs to You and Me. Every learner is a teacher, every teacher a learner. From this work, Dr. Newmark received a presidential citation. Because we like that, because as many of you know, we define the Satcher Health Leadership Institute as a learning institute. And we tell all of our students, scholars, and fellows, when you come here, you come to teach and learn. Because we have a lot to learn still, believe that or not. An important aspect of Dr. Newmark's adult life has been participation in civil and youth affairs. He was involved for 6 years with the Synanon Foundation and participated in pioneering work in the treatment of drug addiction and with Operation Bootstraps in central Los Angeles in projects to improve interracial relations. He has been a consultant to the California Special Olympics and the California State Department of Education. Dr. Newmark has served on advisory boards of the National Commission on Resources for Youth, the Center for Reuniting Families, and 2 drug abuse prevention programs, Amnesty Incorporated in Arizona, and Tunes S in Los Angeles, now Phoenix House. I hope I didn't mispronounce that too badly. Dr. Newmark is a member of the American Association of Humanistic Psychology, the Charles F. Menninger Society, the National Association for the Mentally Ill, the RAND Corporation Alumni Association, and the National Effective Parenting Initiative. He presently serves on the boards of directors of Catechus Corporation, which is a nonprofit corporation developing and distributing informational and educational media. Well, I usually don't talk about people's ages, but I think his age is also a part of the story. He is easily the oldest person we've had present here. He's older than I am. He's actually 84. But I think his age is a part of the story. And I think his wife, Deborah, is a part of that story. So, but we're delighted. Bert always tells me that I should be sure to remind you that this is being webcast. When you get up to ask a question, and I hope you will, remember that this is being webcast. We need you to come to the mic so that everybody can hear the question. There will be people sending in questions to the web also. So I'm delighted today to welcome to the Morehouse School of Medicine, Center of Excellence on Health Disparities, and the Satcher Health Leadership Institute, Dr. Gerald Newmark and his wife, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Satcher for letting everybody know how young I am. He didn't tell you that the reason I stay so young is my wife is only 25 years old. Actually, I first met her when she was 17. She was dating a young cousin of mine. And unfortunately, she would have been part of my family, but he died at a very young age, at about 20, of cancer. And when I was looking around many years later, Deborah came to California, and I had just gotten divorced, and there she was all grown up, and I said, this looks like it could work. Anyway, we've been together for 30 years, and it has worked out very well. We owe it all to this book. I'm really excited to be here, and just a little story of how I got here. Very little discussion, as Dr. Satcher mentioned, is about emotional health and the neglect of emotional health, and how do we prevent mental illness. And after I read Dr. Satcher's report on emotional health and agenda to action, I thought I have to get in touch with him. Because my philosophy is talk is good, but I prefer talk to action. And I discovered that he was at Morehouse, and so I put in a call, and I spoke to his assistant, I forget which one, but I asked her, what's the best way to get an appointment with Dr. Satcher? And she says, by email. So I said, would you please give me his email address? And I started to write it. And as I was writing it, I said, by the way, the reason I want to see Dr. Satcher is because he knows more about emotional health than anybody in this country. I may have added, maybe anybody in the world. Then I said some more nice things about him, and she said, would you like to speak to him? I said, well, I said, would I like to speak to him? I said, you mean now? So he came to the phone, and we spoke for a while, and here I am. So my philosophy is think big, you can always act small later on. Get to the person on top. Anyway, it's been a pleasure to be here. People told me that Atlanta was a beautiful city, and but be careful about the weather. The weather, I think, has been fine. We got off the plane, I got into a air-conditioned cab, drove to an air-conditioned hotel, went out to eat in an air-conditioned restaurant. I said, this is like every place else that we go. But he said it was a beautiful city, and it is. The reception we've gotten from Dr. Satcher and Renee Jackson. Anybody know Renee Jackson? Isn't she wonderful? We have a round of applause for Renee. And it seems that everybody smiles and says good morning. Deborah and I walk around the lake in the San Fernando Valley, 1 3/10 miles, at least a couple of times a week. And there are lots of people walking around. I always say, good morning. Nobody answered. I smile and say, good morning. Nobody answered. We walk 1.5 miles and we can't get one person to respond. And here everybody smiles. So I thank you for that reception. I've been speaking publicly for, I don't know, 40, 50 years. And besides losing my voice, I always find that before I get up before a new group, I'm always a little nervous. But there are interesting things happen, and sometimes I'd like to share them. For instance, some years ago, I was scheduled to give a presentation in New York City. I was born in the Bronx, New York, and grew up there. Is there anybody here from the Bronx, New York? There we go. Whoa, wow. Born there also. Wow. So at any rate, I arrive at the airport, at Kennedy Airport, and I get into a cab to go to a hotel downtown New York. And it's a miserable day. It is raining, it is pouring, it's windy. It's one of the worst days I've ever experienced. And the cab driver is whistling and singing, and he's as happy as a lark. I said, how come you're so happy? Oh, no, and then he says to me, beautiful day, isn't it? Only a Bronx taxi cab driver could do that. So I said, beautiful day, are you crazy? It's miserable outside. He says, when you're in love, every day is beautiful. So I didn't say that, but I said, but I'm not in love. He said, that's your problem, buddy. So I have to say I come here without that problem. I'm married, I have a wonderful wife, I have a son who's been very ill. He suffers from schizophrenia, and he's made a recovery that's really unbelievable. and I'll mention something about that later. Since I met Deborah and she was working and had her own business, I was able to retire about 30 years ago after we met. So she has become indispensable from the first day until now. At any rate, some other things happen when you come to a place. One day I was the keynote speaker at a high school graduation. And I'm walking up and down outside the auditorium, and this young, attractive graduating student comes up to me and says, "Are you Dr. Newmark?" I said, "Yes, I think so." So she looks at me and said, "Would you please do me a favor today?" I said, "Yes, what is it?" She says, "Please don't be boring." We've had so many boring speakers at this school. So I said, "Well, if I am, it'll be the first time." And she learned what people who know me and my brother and family, we prefer honest arrogance to false humility. One more story. These are all true stories. I was keynote speaker at a teachers conference, and I was to speak right after lunch, like now. I see all of you are eating. I'm not, but that's okay. So I'm sitting eating, and this gentleman comes up to me, and he says, "You know, I'm a teacher here, and I have another appointment. I don't know if I could stay for the whole thing. Do you have anything meaningful to say?" That's something that you want to hear when you're a little nervous anyway. So I looked at him and I said, "Actually not. I'm going to be superficial the way I usually am." And the truth of the matter is, my brother and I, who's a dentist, so we have something in common with your president. I say we because my brother and I did a lot of lecturing together to dentists on, I was going to say on parent-child relations. No, on doctor-patient relations. But I'm not here to talk about that book. It's out of print, so I'm not here to sell that book. At any rate, I feel I have something very meaningful to talk about. Dr. Satcher mentioned what it was about emotional health and about prevention. And my feeling is that one of the big reasons why, decade after decade, we hear about new innovations and the crisis that we're having in education and with families, and that in spite of the fact there are some things that happen and they're sort of successful, nothing lasts and education does not get transformed. In fact, right now we're about as poor as we've ever been. Morale of teachers is low, children is low, and parents is low. So we have no place to go but up, really. And I think we can do something about it. And that's why I wrote the book, How to Raise Emotionally Healthy Children. I wrote the book for two reasons. One, I wanted to raise public consciousness about the problem so that there won't be just Dr. Satcher and myself talking about it and doing something about it, but that we can get lots of people to do something about it. And I also wanted to provide a practical manual or book that teachers and parents could use in interacting not only with children but with each other, so they could be good role models. Because the 5 critical needs that I talk about in the book are needs that not only children have, we all have it. And children learn from watching their parents and their teachers how they act with one another. So today I have 2 goals. One is I want to motivate you to read the book. That's the first goal. We have your names, and we will be checking up on you in a month or 2. And those who haven't read it will ask you to refund the money you paid for it, which should be easy because you didn't pay anything for it. The other goal is to talk to you about action that you could take to help this movement that is underway, but we need to grow. And I'm going to mention 4 kinds of actions that you can take. One would be an action that would improve your life. Secondly, would be an action that will improve your family. The third would be an action that will improve the school in your neighborhood. And the fourth will be an action at some organization where you work. Now, most of you work here. I know there's not much to improve, but you'll be able to think of some action that you'll be able to take. So I'll be very happy if I learn afterwards that you all read the book and that you've taken some sort of action within a 3 to 6 month period that helps to improve 2 of those in 2 of those 4 areas. I'm going to start by talking about parenting in general, just to give a context, and also to point out how difficult the task is that we have. Don't worry about me losing my voice. Deborah's ready to take over at any moment. I usually like to ask 2 questions. First of all, this is not one of the questions, but I'll ask it anyway. How many of you are parents? Oh, wow. So the question I usually ask parents is, I'm going to make a statement, and I want to know whether you agree with this statement. If you agree with the statement, raise your hand. Parenting is probably one of the most important responsibilities any one of us can have in a lifetime. Okay, if you didn't raise your hand, please leave. The second statement is, parenting is probably one of the most difficult, stressful, anxiety-provoking, and complex. Some people are raising to it. Deborah, we've come to the right place. So, we are in the right place. I knew that the minute we walked in. In fact, when we talked to Renee on the telephone and other people. But starting with that, there's a third question that I would ask parents. And you can, if you want, if you dare, and you're courageous, shout out the answer. How often do you and your spouse or significant other ask the question, how well are we doing as parents, and what could we be doing differently or better? Anyone? What? Daily? How many said never? Okay. So we have a few people who are telling the truth. Most of the time when I ask people to write their answers, we get never. Certainly not on any regular basis that we get together and say, how are we doing? Usually we're thinking and looking at how the kids are doing. And we're examining them all the time. They're not doing well, they're a pain in the neck, they don't take care of things. We're examining them. One of the most important things we're going to learn that we have to do is ask ourselves that question, is to become students of our own behavior. Not only about parenting, about anything you want to improve in, you need some kind of feedback to know how well you're doing. One of the biggest inhibitors to change is success. And by success, it can mean that you're just getting along. I had a management consulting firm for about 10 years. And you go to a place and the president would complain that his people weren't working hard, and he was right, and they were making a lot of mistakes, and he was right. And I said, why don't you do something about it? He says, we're doing fine. Well, because you're doing fine today doesn't mean you're going to be doing fine the next day. And they learned that. Some of the best companies in the world are finding that out. So that's something that we have to take a look at. Now, one might ask, why is parenting so difficult? We get such tremendous practice, right? You get practice every day. You don't get any practice? You don't talk to your kids? You don't see them? You hide them in a closet? We have the opportunity for practice every day. But if you're practicing mistakes, you get better and better at practicing mistakes. So I did a little research, and I found a a want ad that describes the role of a parent. And that'll give us a little insight. It said, wanted parent, cook, dishwasher, house cleaner, coach, doctor, nurse, chauffeur, teacher, entertainer, therapist, laundress, repairman, maid. I see all the ladies are laughing, the men are silent. They haven't experienced all those paths. And then it goes on, 24 hours a day, no pay and no vacations. Now I ask you, who would be dumb enough to take a job like that? A lot of us, right? A lot of us. Another thing is that we come to it without any experience. The baby is born, we're all excited. 24 hours later we say, wow, up all night. We don't get any guidebook. I'm happy to say that our book is being given out in, maybe about 25 hospitals now to all parents of newborn babies. Just recently they've started doing it in the city of Salinas. That's a city that has adopted the book in the program. And we're just now, we started working with the schools, and we're getting involved now with the business community, and we're very with some of the progress. Deborah, you want to say a little bit, because I want to talk about next about some of the things that we've achieved and how we've done that, and then where we want to go in the future. And Deborah really sort of runs that project in Salinas, and she can tell you about the progress.
He never calls me up. So this is a first. I, too, want to just say how pleased I am for being here. It's just been a wonderful experience. And Renee's going to tell me, am I too close? Oh, okay, not close enough. Thank you. And the Salinas Project, which you will have an opportunity to see a 9-minute DVD, is a city in Northern California. It's predominantly a migrant community. It is, if any of you purchase packaged lettuce, you will see the name Salinas. Salinas is known as the lettuce capital of the world. It's also in Monterey County, which butts against Carmel, which people might know is a beautiful town. So it has a combination of a lot of things up there. But Salinas is our first emotional, health-friendly city who has adopted our book, which has been for the last at least 4 years, but mainly in 2 years, where the mayor has actually endorsed the project. The schools there are giving out the books free to all parents who enroll children into their schools. Parenting classes are going on. Our latest thing is that the library's there, and this is also the home of John Steinbeck, who wrote Grapes of Wrath. The library's just completed a project where 2,000 copies donated by the community were given out free to anyone who asked, along with parenting classes that went along with it. Now the hospital is started to give out the book. There will be 2,000 newborn babies and their parents who will be able to have parenting classes, as well as be able to receive the book as soon as they are born. So that's our Salinas project. I'm happy to say also that the WIC program in Southern California, for the last 5 years, through an African American breastfeeding program, there's been over 13,500 African American families who have gotten the book, been engaged in 5-week parenting classes ongoing, and this is a program that's been very successful and is now being adopted throughout the state of California, and on and on. And being here also, there's so many different things. Head Start has adopted our program, where across the country people are taking our free facilitators guide, and they are doing programs within their schools, churches, things like that. So once I bring Jerry back up, you'll learn more about the 5 critical needs and how beneficial it will be to all of your families. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
In addition to the things Deborah said as far as some of the highlights, and you have a summary of them, is the fact that the book has been translated, well, I think you mentioned that, it's been translated into several different languages, and one of the cities in Austria, city of Dornbirn, has adopted the book. So I'm finally convinced. For a long time I wasn't sure we had something, but I'm finally convinced after almost 400,000 books and audiences like you who react positively to what we're doing, that we really do have something. And Dr. Satcher was very encouraging in that first phone call I had with him. He said, I think you're on to something. And I hope that we'll be able to do something with Morehouse. What I'd like to do now is tell you how we go about trying to satisfy those needs, what the program is. The program essentially has 3 steps to it. The first step is read the book and start implementing the concepts. I think you'll find when I start giving you examples that you'll be able to leave here and start doing it immediately. The second thing is to become a student of your own behavior. And we say that most of the time we're very good students in our country of everybody else's behavior, but it's very difficult to stand back and be a student of your own behavior. So we explain how to go about that, keep a journal, have family feedback sessions. Deborah and I have had a feedback session once a week for the last 30 years. And all we do is say, okay, how are we doing this week? And then we both speak. At the beginning, we'd give each other feedback. Some would be negative, some would be positive. Most of the feedback I received was positive. But she wasn't ready yet. She wasn't ready yet to be truthful. That came later. But it's been very helpful and very important. And in prior work that I did with the school, this school belongs to you and me, one of the things that we had there was all the teachers had feedback sessions with their students every week. And the principals had feedback session with all the teachers once a week. And the parents were able to sit in on those sessions. And during the 6 years, I used to sit in on a lot of them, and they were fascinating. The teachers generally would begin their feedback session by saying, what did I do this week that you liked or didn't like? And we suggest in the book, when we talk about it in Chapter 4, when we talk about becoming a professional at parenting, about possibilities for conducting these family feedback sessions. And that's one of them. And we saw some interesting things. I remember in with one group, the teacher asked that question, and one of the boys said, I didn't like it when Mary cried. And the teacher said, well, what didn't you like? He said, only sissies and babies cry, and you should have stopped it. I was embarrassed. This was this was a 3rd grader. And so she then started a discussion with the class. How do the rest of you feel? Well, most of the boys followed suit and said the same thing. Yeah, you should have stopped them, sissies. One boy in the back of the room stood up and he said, teacher, I think that girls cry on the outside and boys cry on the inside. That's quite an insight from a young kid like that. We also had other situations where in one of the schools, Pacoima Elementary School, which was built for 500 students and had 1,500, and we had 3 different ethnic groups, Afro-American, Latino, and white, all poor. And these kids all took turns at tutoring at different times. And I remember in one class we had a group of, a mixed group of these kids. There were about 3 of them. And they came down to this class, and the teacher said that you have to go back to your room because I'm a substitute and she's not here. And the kids refused to go. They said, no, these kids need us. We're staying. We know what to do. She said, oh, okay. And they stayed there. These were kids who were considered incorrigible. Well, they were incorrigible if you put them down. You never give them anything meaningful to do, and they're not treated with respect, and all of these things happen. But we found out that these kids have a lot to add. They were part of groups that would interview new teachers, and at one point I said to the principal of one of the schools that we want the kids to be part of that group, the committee that interviews new teachers. And he says, well, how, are you going to have a 5th or 6th grade to interview new teachers? What are they going to contribute? I said, well, they're the consumers of the teacher. They must know something about it. When we interview them, they have a lot to say. So let's see. So he said, well, what about training? Are you going to train them before they do this? I said, why don't we just see how they do on their own? So he said, okay. So we went in there after the first session. He said, boy, I wish I had had a tape, and the tape recorded that. One of the kids said to one of the women who was applying for a teaching position, he asked her, he said, why do you want to teach in a school like this? We have so much trouble here, and our academic rating is so poor. He says, are you taking a job so you can help your husband get through school? So she says, no. He says, well, why? She says, well, I just like kids. She says, yeah, but this is not an easy school to teach at. Then he says, have you ever been involved in the civil rights movement? This was at the height of the movement in the 60s. And have you ever taken part in anything? What have you done? And she said, I'm not one of those people who carry signs and join in marches. And he said, I didn't ask you what you haven't done. I asked you, what have you done? Talk about wisdom. So, getting back to the 5 critical needs, this is what can happen when you empower kids. This is what can happen when you give them a chance to speak up and say how they feel, which, as they say, we don't do enough. So let me go through some of the 5 needs so you can see what people have to work with. Take the first need, the need to feel respected. Here we're talking about something that most kids hear. When I was growing up in New York, I used to hear it all the time. Respect your parents, respect older people, respect your teachers. What about respecting children? How do children learn about respect? Well, when we talk about it, we're not talking about something very complex. We're talking about treating someone in a way that is polite, that is civil, that is attentive and thoughtful. That's all we're talking about. And so we look at the behavior of some of the parents, and they act in a way that they're not aware of at all. I was working with, doing a workshop with a group of about 30 child care providers. And I asked them to go around and mention one thing that they did either in their professional life or either as a parent with their own children after reading the book. And one lady who was a nurse said, as soon as I finished reading the book, I got my 2 sons together. One was 7, one was 10 years old. And I said, do I treat you kids with respect? And the young one said, what are you talking about, Mom? And he took off. The older one said, not always. And she said she found herself stiffening up and said, oh yeah, what is it that I do? He said, sometimes you're sarcastic. She said, oh, well, can you give me an example? So he said, sure. I came in to ask you a question the other day, and your back was towards me, and you turned around and you said, can't you see I only have 2 hands? The kid shook his head, yeah. I see that. And her reaction was, wow, you know, I really am sorry. I had no idea that I was having that effect. Do me a favor, the next time something like that happens, let me know, because obviously I'm not paying attention to it. So he said, sure, Mom, don't worry about it, it's okay. So now you have the kid who's taking care of his mother, so she doesn't feel too bad. How to raise emotionally healthy mothers. 2 weeks later, the kid is back. He's taking her at his word. And he says, Mom, I have another question. So she tells us that she bit her teeth, she turned around and she says, yes, darling, what is it? And the kid says, Mom, you're doing it again. She says, what do you mean? I haven't said anything yet. And he said, I see it on your face. So they see everything, they understand it, they know what's going on, and we treat them haphazardly, just as things come up. We react to them. We ask the kids sometimes, what are the problems that you have with your parents? And most of the time they say, we don't have good communication. I said, in what way? Well, we don't have conversations, we have interviews. They say, where are you going? When are you coming back? What are you going to be doing? And why are you doing that? So kids need to feel respected. And it goes back to simple things when you're with kids, saying please, thank you, I'm sorry, and role model it. That's the best way for them to feel what it's like to experience being respected. The need to feel important. Here we're talking about something else that is not rocket science. We're talking about feeling that I have some worth, that I have some value, that I count, that I am somebody. You see it with little kids. You get into an elevator with a little kid and you want to press the button. They say, no, no, me, me. They want to do everything. And very often we get in their way. I was with a young mother who had a child in a high chair, and he was feeding himself. He had a bib on, he was trying to feed himself, and he was spilling on the bib and sometimes on his clothes. And she grabbed the spoon out of his hand and she said, look at you, that's so sloppy, here, let me help you. I thought she should have been putting her arm around him and saying, isn't it wonderful? You're trying to learn how to feed yourself. When you think about it, it's not that difficult to make kids feel important. One of the things you can do is ask their opinions sometimes. You'd be surprised they have opinions. You'd be amazed at some of them. And let them make decisions. Give them decisions and give them choices to make. There's one thing that one family did that I liked very much. They had a family meeting to decide who was going to do what. There's a lot of work to be done in any family. You've got meals and you've got places to be cleaned and so on. And they got together and they had a flip chart and they said, we're going to try to reach a consensus and get everything that needs to be done, those things, major things, assigned to somebody. And we want to get some kind of agreement here. If we can't get a consensus, then we will make the decision, but we want your participation. So they listed all the things that had to be done. Now, pretty soon they saw that some of them only the parents could do, so they would check those off. Only the parents could go to the bank and take money out. Kids didn't have a license, so they couldn't drive the car, and so on. So they listed them. The kids were impressed right away. They didn't realize that the parents had that many things to do. But by the time they finished, everybody had a job. So one kid, for instance, had responsibility to take care of the dog. But not only did he have that responsibility, but he received a title. He was called Director of Animal Husbandry. That's not bad for a young kid, right? And he received money. They said, do a budget on what money you're going to need to perform this responsibility, and we'll supply the money. And another child was safety inspector. And this young lady went around and she took notes on all the things that might cause an accident. And she was doing very well until at one point she decided she wanted to have a fire drill at 1 a.m. and nobody would go along with that. So they didn't do it. So the need to feel important. And it's a need that if you don't find constructive ways to satisfy the need, the kids will find destructive ways. That's why they join gangs. That's why sometimes the young teenagers have children. They feel like they're nobody, and they want to be somebody, and they will find a way. So I think this is an important concept to keep in mind, to express early and often, and to get the kids working with you and everybody working together rather than you always taking charge and so on. The third need is the need to feel accepted. And here we're talking about the need to feel that I am a unique person and have a right to my own desires, wants, opinions, etc. And if you don't think kids have these needs, and you trivialize what they have to say, and you don't accept it because you don't like what they're saying, or you ignore them, or you tell them wait till you grow up and then you'll be able to understand that, you'll find that you won't have communication with them. It's okay in the present state because you don't have much communication anyway. But if you want to continue that, fine. But if you don't want to continue that, you have to think more about accepting them. That doesn't mean you're accepting any behavior, but you accept attitudes and opinions, feelings, etc. A simple example, sitting in on a parent support group where one woman said, oh, I'm having the same problem with my older son. He keeps complaining and yapping about that I love his younger daughter more than I love him. Anybody have that problem at home? I had that problem because my parents always loved my brother more than they loved me. That's why I'm in this business now. So the question I usually ask is, well, what have you done up to now? It doesn't matter what the problem is, I usually get the same answer. We've done everything. I've yelled, I've tried to bribe them, I try to convince them, I tell them it's not true. And I said, and then you live happily ever after. She says, no, he's still doing the same thing. That's why I'm bringing it up. I said, well, suppose you put yourself in his place. I don't know if you have brothers or sisters, and you found out that you thought that something you perceive, it may not be true, that all the attention was going to your siblings. How would that make you feel? Well, not too good. Well, so why don't you accept his right to his perception? That's all it is at this point. It's not a fact. Accept his right to his perception that you love his sister more than you love him. How would your answer change if you did that? What might you say to him? Anybody? What's that? Okay, that's a good start. I'm sorry that you feel this way. It's not the way I feel. Could you tell me something I'm doing that makes you feel that way? You ask questions. You try to find out, get at the cause of this. So now you're on his side, and there's nothing to argue about. In my family, I had a major problem with my son who suffered from schizophrenia. He was a straight-A student, a very good athlete. He had everything going for him, and he was a second-year pre-med student at the University of Colorado when he dropped out of school and later on was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He had the kind that was negative symptoms, was withdrawal and isolation, and it's easier on parents, but it was still very difficult because he would disappear for periods of time, and he would walk 18 hours a day without sleep, and he would say that was his job. And this went on for quite a while. And there were times he would be with us, and other times we had to have him committed. He wanted to commit suicide at one time, so we had a family meeting, and we said, you know, there are a lot of things we'll let you do, you're your own person, but we won't let you commit suicide. That's not negotiable. But anyway, anytime medication came up, we would get into this a conflict. He would say, I don't want to take it anymore. He'd become a different person. He would stiffen up and he'd say, no medication. There's nothing wrong with me. The medication is the problem. I had no problem. The medication caused the problem. That went on for a number of years until we found a different psychiatrist. And I heard him speak once. I was very impressed, and I got to know him a little bit, and I asked him if he could see someone from a different location, because they lived in different towns. David lived in one of the suburbs of San Fernando Valley. And he said, sure, he would be happy to. I said, who would see him on your staff? He said, no, I'll see him. I said, oh, wonderful. At the first session, I sat in on it, and he said to him, David, how can I help you? That's the way all those sessions start, right? How can I help you? And David said, it's the medication. And then he went into his litany. He would say, the medication is the problem. I never had a problem. You could help me if you would talk to my father. I had what do you call it? I had control of his actions. A what? Not power of attorney, but something like that. At any rate, I could insist on it. But actually, you knew that underneath it, he must have understood something, because he had so many occasions that he could take off anyway. I'm running out of time. At any rate, Dr. Kapelowitz, who was from South America and spoke Spanish fluently, said to David, David, gee, I'm sorry. I can't help you with that. I can't recommend it because my experience, and I've had treated a lot of people who had some of the same problems that you may have. So I couldn't recommend it. But if you and your father decide to go ahead, I'll see you anyway. And I thought, wow, this guy, I think, is going to be all right. But he didn't stop there. He asked another question. He says, is there any other way I can help you? And David said, well, could you get my father to lower the dosage? He was taking 400 milligrams of a very strong medication. And he said, well, David, let's talk about it. What would you like to lower it to from 400? He says, well, how about down to 50? So he smiled and he said, gee, David, I couldn't go along with that. How about we lower it to 50 to 350, and next week we'll talk again. David was so surprised that someone was listening to him and actually acting upon it that he said, okay. Well, after 1 month they were down to 200, and at 200 I stayed in these sessions for about 6 months and then I dropped out. But at 200 David said, well, I'd like to go down now to either 100 or 50. And Alex said to him, you know, David, you're doing so well. At this point, your serum level is not stable. It never was stable. It would jump from 200 to 150 to down as low as 25. So he had such a relationship with David that David went along with it. He said, okay. He said, as soon as it gets stable, we'll talk about it again and we'll make some other arrangement. So for a while, everything was going well, and a couple of months later, I'm getting these reports, and all of a sudden I see it down to 25. And I know if he stops it, the literature says he's going to have a problem. He had a problem with another medication where he developed this tardive dyskinesia, which is moving of muscles and tongues. It was awful. And I sort of panicked. He's going to be down to nothing, and the medication may not have the same effect if he starts up again. So I called Alex up and I said, yeah, I'd like to be at the next session. So I came to it, and I said, he asked me, he said, how's he doing? I said, he's doing fine. He seems to be improving, and his sense of humor is coming back. He says, you know what? All the cases aren't the same. David He may not be taking all of it, but he may be taking it, and the body is reacting differently to it. Let's just, for a while, forget about the serum level and just make our decisions based on how he's acting. I said, okay, he's willing to take a chance with my son. Okay, I had confidence in him also. Anyway, it's 4 years later. We've never discussed the medication again. He's still taking 200 milligram. Nobody pays any attention to it. We never talk about it. He's had a job for 4 years where they think he's the best worker there. He's bought with his own money a pickup truck. He's a very good worker. They say he's the best worker there. I meet him every Saturday, and he's a good athlete. We play paddle tennis together down at the beach. Or sometimes he comes over to the house and we play table tennis. Deborah loves him. He comes home and she cooks a great meal, and he gets up and he does all the dishes, and she has a list of things to be fixed in the house, and he fixes them all. So this came from the fact of I started doing the same thing as Alex did. I didn't bother him with the medication anymore. What I did was I went back, read my book again, and I said, Alex is right. I have to accept his right to make that decision now. I think we're going to stop here. Where is Renee? How much time do we have? You want the last two? Okay, I'm gonna follow Dr. Satcher's advice. He may be my boss one day. I'm looking ahead. Briefly, the need to feel included. Here we're talking about the need to feel a connection, a need to feel related to other people in a close way, the need to feel that a sense of community. If we don't have that feeling, we'll try to get it someplace else, in gangs, with cliques, and so on. I mean, we have that need as human beings to have other people who care about you and to think about you, who you can talk to, and so on. John Galbraith once said that the problem with our cities is that they are encampments of strangers and not communities. And that's what we need to work in. Well, how do you develop a community? You do things together. In the book, we list about 150 different kinds of activities that you can do as a family, or some of them, not all of them. And so we say one thing you could do is have a family activity night, and where the kids get to help pick. The criteria is pick something that all of us can enjoy, and you get credit if everybody enjoys it. One of the things that we talked about was family meetings. I told you about the decision-making meeting to decide on assigning chores. I mentioned the feedback session. We recommend this strongly, that you start having feedback sessions. We once had a situation, this is the last story, where after presenting at a conference, a woman came up and said, had a question about, she had a foster kid at home, and he lied all the time. And she said, I don't know what to do about it. It seems like he's a pathological liar. I said, well, what have you tried? You know the answer to that? Everything. We tried bribing him, we tried punishing. Nothing works. I said, this is not difficult. I'll give you the answer. Stop trying to fix him. You won't do it. He's been in 3 or 4 other foster homes. They haven't succeeded. You have no relationship with him. Why should he trust you? He doesn't know you at all. I said, if you want to do something, read the book, start having regular feedback sessions, and start the sessions where you're not talking to him, you're not trying to fix him. Get that attention away from him. And talk about yourselves. And at one point, you may start a meeting by saying, let's each of us go around and mention one thing we did this week that we don't like about ourselves, one behavior that we didn't like. And you give the first example. And the example The example you could give at one point is, oh, I told a lie this week at work. Now, don't make it up if you haven't told a lie, because I know a lot of you never have told a lie. So you may have to wait a while until it appears. I mean, you sometimes tell a fib, but you never tell a lie, right? But you do that and you go around, and when you get to him, he'll ignore you. He'll just sit there like that. I knew from experience, because with my first wife we had a foster kid for about 8 months. And they're not going to get involved with you right away. But if you keep doing this over time and get the attention off him and share with him what's going on in you, and sometimes ask his opinion, you'll find a change over time. So inclusion is important. The last thing is the need to feel, I've gotten permission to go a little more. I don't want to get you in trouble. So, the need to feel secure. In our country today, we talk a lot, or if you see books about discipline, if we had more discipline, everything would be fine. You know, discipline the kids, discipline. Well, the truth of the matter is, oh, you can't hear me? Sorry. The truth of the matter is the parents would love to have more control. That's the conflict going on. The kids want freedom and the parents want control. But they don't know how to do it and they can't do it. The idea of discipline, hello? See, we need more discipline. Anyway, the idea that discipline is one aspect, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but there are other things. We talk about security as creating an atmosphere where people care about each other and show it, where people feel free to express themselves and there are other people listening, where conflicts are okay, but you find constructive ways to solve them, and where kids participate in their own evolution by taking part in setting up these rules. That's what we're talking about as far as security is concerned. So where does discipline come in? Well, we recommend that you have a session in where you say, what are the rules that this family needs? And that means rules for everybody, for parents and for the kids, in order to function in a healthy, happy way. And then once you come up with them, you say, well, what are the consequences if any of us, including the parents, don't follow through? And you decide on the consequences. You find that sometimes the kids are stricter at the consequences they want, especially for the parents. And you come up with these. You increase the probability of their understanding it, and you increase the probability of supporting it. The way it happens now is the parents make up all the rules, and then you spend the rest of the year nagging them and threatening them, and it doesn't get done. So that's maybe the most important thing. The other thing is how you and your spouse are getting along. When parents are bickering and fighting all the time, kids become very insecure and worrying. Kids complain that their parents are worried about them all the time. Last story. I know from experience because my mother was a world-class warrior. And one day my brother and I came by to say goodbye to her. We were going on a trip to Indianapolis to lecture. And when we arrived there, he called my mother on the phone. And first thing she said was, how's Jerry? And he says, Jerry, he's fine. She said, he had a cold when he left Los Angeles. He should be in bed by now. It's 11 o'clock here. So he said, Mom, the kid is 56 years old. He can decide when to go to bed. So one of the most important things you can do for a child is give him a little freedom. And if you can role model to him what it's like to be a relaxed, happy person who is enjoying life, that's one of the best things you can do. All this worrying makes him uncomfortable and her uncomfortable. The last thing I said to you, four things that you could do after you read the book. One is start applying the concepts, especially where it helps you personally. Second thing is apply them in a family, as that lady did. She started having family feedback sessions. The third thing is, wherever you live, there must be a school. Go down there and talk to the principal, tell them about this program, and see if you can interest them in doing it. Fourth, most of you here have a job. And in your job, you can bring up the question of giving the book to all the employees in the organization, the professionals and the non-professionals. And maybe, as one or two companies have done, provided space where if they come on off hours in the morning or during lunch hour or in the evening, where they could have a group discussion periodically. And I think you'll find that we may one day live to see this in every home in America and with every family. And finally, my favorite philosopher, Pfeiffer, who depicts a middle-aged man who's going through a midlife crisis, and he's talking out loud. And he says, when I get passed over for a job promotion that I've long deserved, I wait. When my father treats me like a fool, though I am over 40 and the father of 3, I wait. When my children disregard my advice, shoplift, get pregnant, get into car crashes, I wait. When my wife berates me for my incompetence and moral cowardice, I wait. Eventually, my company will go bankrupt, my father will die, my children will go to jail, and my wife will leave me. I can't wait anymore. So I hope you won't wait. You'll do one of those actions. Oh, we'll do the DVD. We're going to do a DVD now, a 9-minute DVD of the program, the beginning of the program at Salinas, and then we'll have time for questions.
English, okay.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Y bienvenidos a todos a esta fantástica tarde en la Escuela Morondameros. We're going to have a very exciting evening, and we're very proud. Look at, we have a full house here. We're going to learn different skills or techniques on new information. So thank you to you, the community, for participating in this event. I would like to introduce to the start of the night, Dr. Gerald Newmark.
I think emotional health and the failure to meet the needs of our children is one of the most important subjects we could be thinking about and one of the most serious problems facing our nation.
One of the things that makes our challenge tough in Salinas is, you know, the national average, give or take, for high school dropouts is 30%. In Salinas, it's 50%.
Failure to meet the emotional needs of our children not only threatens and jeopardizes their future, but that of our nation.
What we need to do as a community is really come together and erode the appeal of the gang lifestyle before point of first contact. And unfortunately, that can be grades 1, 2, and 3, where we really, I think, have to kind of create that protective shield around young people and get them off to the right start. That's the best investment we can make. And I think this book really speaks to that directly.
I wrote the book, How to Raise Emotionally Healthy Children, because I wanted to, first of all, raise public awareness about the problem. Because if we're not aware of it, there's nothing we can do about it. And I wanted to also provide a practical tool that parents and teachers could use to identify and satisfy children's emotional needs. And these are the 5 needs that I've identified. And once we know
Y esas son las 5 necesidades que él ha identificado.
First need is the need to feel respected. And here I'm talking about something very basic. The need to feel that I am being treated in a civil, courteous, thoughtful, attentive manner. Courteous.
Mucho gusto. Gracias. Rosa Alejandra.
And Marta.
Mucho gusto. Marta.
And Rosa is on her way to Fresno.
Merced County. Yeah.
Yep.
My husband and I, we were trying to get through some challenges in our own little family, and we kept thinking, is this working with a therapist? And so I got this little book, and I'll read it because I love to read. So I read, and I was kind of like Rose. It was a little book, and I thought, what's this going to teach me? And then it was like, wow. So I gave it to my husband, and he read it, and we're like, we just paid a lot of money, and we didn't get all this out of it.
My youngest is 20 years old, and I said, boy, if I had this book, we always talk about how we don't have the book, but this is the book. But I have a grandson, and as soon as I got my hot little hands on this book, I started implementing that with my grandson, and it's effective. So this is the book. And then Marta said, wait a minute, Rose, we need to talk, because wouldn't it be great if every baby that was born, every parent got this book?
When I would talk to Rose, and I'd meet somebody else that was struggling with their children, and so I would call up Rose, can I get a couple more books? Can I get a couple more books? And she did. She kept giving me books, and then I decided at that time I was beginning my preparation to become a Lamaze instructor and a childbirth educator. And so I just decided, as my gift to my students who finish the Lamaze program, I give this to them.
I work with couples and families and children, and I use this in everything. I mean, the best way to prevent child abuse is to support families, because most people want to do a wonderful job. I don't care how drug-addled they may be, or how depressed, or how much they drink. Truly, at the core, I think of everyone, they want to do a better job. I've never met anybody who didn't think they could do a better job or wanted to do a better job parenting. And this is a way to give that to them.
La verdad, yo encontré el libro en Guadalajara, Jalisco, donde yo nací. I am an instructional services coordinator, but one of the components is migrant parental involvement in schools. How can we provide supplemental services to migrant children and to parents? So I believe that every parent should read this book, not only a migrant parent, but everybody.
What I love about it is it's not rocket scientist. It's not in this big highfalutin language that you have to break down. It's very basic, it's very easy, and if you do have parents that are literate, and we do have some in our district and in our county that we present to, visuals are great. We explain it. We have game plans that we work when we do hands-on, and you make it very interactive. And one thing people like to do is people like to know that when they're having problems with their kids, that they're not alone and they're not, by themselves. So it's the sharing and it's the ongoing support. So that's the beauty of it. But you've got to present it, and you've got to be really innovative in how you do it to certain populations.
Let me give you some examples. Here is a small boy on a tricycle zigzagging on a walk. Behind him is his father. He yells, "Stop zigzagging, go straight." The child turns around and looks at his father, doesn't say anything, but he has a question in his eyes, and then he turns back and he starts zigzagging again. And then the father comes up to him and says, "I told you not to zigzag. If I have to tell you again, you're going to be in trouble." I'd like you to take now 2 minutes, pair off with someone at your table, and discuss what do you think the parent learned, and what do you think the child learned, and what could the parent have done differently.
I run a lot of different programs, and we have an evaluator that's on staff. We've had the privilege of having them. If I run a program and there aren't any measurable outcomes, logically I'm not going to use it again. When we got Raising Emotionally Healthy Children and we developed the baseline data, and I said, come on, Peter, is this worthwhile? Should I continue to do it? The anecdotal tells me I need to do it. So we did pre, we did post testing, and out of that we determined that we were in fact making change and really building that communication between child and parents and bringing back that parents are prevention and parents are the anti-drug, and this is one of the things that are the contributing factors.
Yes.
Usted, señora, pudiera.
Fue que yo lo que el mensaje que captamos fue que yo visualicé al niño como un niño de 7 años. Y él,
The problem sets change, and life is very hard. But this book is about removing the barriers to a child's potential, and to basically all of our potentials.
Think about what happened there. Whenever I tell this story, it's amusing. But it's not amusing because this is the way children grow up. From the time they're very small, they hear, don't do that, stop doing that, at home, in school, without any explanations at all.
We have a potential of changing a whole generation. We have that potential.
So thank you for inviting me here to share that stuff with all of you. Thank you.
So we're gonna take time now to do a Q&A with Dr. Newmark. If you do have questions, please come to the mic that's in the middle of the floor. Thank you.
Before the questions, so I don't forget, I have a little presentation to make. This one is for Dr. Satcher. It's a magic keychain. It's also, I call it a magic keychain. It's also a stress breaker, because no matter how stressful a situation is, if someone comes in and they're upset about something, anything goes wrong, you just press this button and everybody smiles. I've tried it out in elevators, in lines where people are getting upset, and you'll find it works all the time. I'm going to ask Dr. Satcher to wait until we all count to 3, and then he'll press it. Okay, don't press it until 3. Okay, so everybody, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. So I'm gonna ask the first question. I was really interested in all of it, but the schools, that's a big topic here in Atlanta now, especially standardized exams and whether or not in fact there has been cheating. And in the midst of all this, you try to figure out how the children are feeling. Adults are debating the issue, accusations are going back and forth. But the whole concept of how we evaluate children is something I'd like to hear your comment on, and how would you respond to this situation?
Overall, I think there's a lot of evidence now that the leaving no child left behind is putting tremendous pressure on everybody without getting any better results. It was doomed from the beginning because they left the standards up to each state. But the point is, these standards are arbitrary standards set by people. The teachers aren't really involved in it, and they're not testing so many abilities. I mean, you're checking off multiple choice tests. It's not a real kind of test that's going to yield something that will actually be valid over a long period of time. There's a book I mentioned to Dr. Satcher called, it's by Diane Ravitch, about sort of the downfall of American schools. And it spells out the whole situation very well. It's counterproductive. I think the question we have to be asking for the major stockholders, which are the children, the parents, and the teachers, what can we do to make the teacher's life better? When you think about it, about 75–80% of our teachers, especially in elementary school, are married and have children. That means they have 2 full-time jobs. Even though there's been some progress, and I know men are doing more at home, but mainly the parents have responsible for that. And then they got 20 kids, 30 kids, they all have different backgrounds, they learn at different rates, they have different personalities, and all this is going on there, and they're supposed to put it all together. And some days they come in, they don't feel like going to work. The question is, how do we make the conditions? I was thinking, and I have an article partly written, in the richest country in the world, there should not be any school that hires a teacher and doesn't pay her or him at least the same amount that a professional lawyer or doctor gets when they're first starting out. That we should make the conditions for the teachers so good that if there's a job being offered, you'll have 100 people, they want to get it. But as it is, we have people coming in there, and at the end of 5 years, 50% of them leave. How do you run a business where you have this kind of turnover all the time? And so we're not asking the right questions. And someone wrote very correctly that you can be doing everything right and not get desired results if you're working on the wrong thing. And we haven't been working on the right thing. Any other questions? Any comments? Any answers?
And I certainly hope my voice will hold up. I too am hoarse. However, my name is Charlotte McKenzie, and I am the program director for an after-school program. I have worked with children and have children of my own for many years, but I'm looking at a problem that we're having in parenting. Not only have I worked with children in the teaching aspect, and after-school programs, but I've worked in the DFACS arena also, and I'm seeing a lot of problems and issues with parenting there. Of course, learning the skills that are necessary to make our children thrive and survive in this society. But my comment to you is I definitely appreciate what your book is offering by what you're saying so far, and I look further and anticipate reading in its entirety your book. However, what I'm looking at now is that what you're offering is starting from conception, and as the children begin to progress. However, I guess my question is to you now. The children are some of our kids that I encounter are almost grown now, okay? And I know we can continue to do it, but what word of encouragement can you give to providers, give to parents, give to teachers that are going to continuously help and assist them in giving what is necessary to help our children today?
Well, in the first place, as I mentioned, I was practically a high school dropout, and I was one of these incorrigible kids, and I barely got into college, and I had trouble for years and years before I really found myself. So first of all, don't lose hope. One of the most important things is for these kids to find somebody who takes a special interest in them, who can bond with them. That came out in the event we had with Steve Lopez and this person that he met who seemed lost out by himself. One person, Steve Lopez, stayed with him and made a friend of him, and was able to bring about amazing changes. So you have to think about what can you be doing. Find out from the kids themselves what could we be doing that would make you feel that this was a great day or a great week. What do you need in your life? We have to do more of these conversations. in groups and also one-on-one. But in the schools, the counselors are overloaded. If any counselor you talk to, they have a workload. They find they're doing paperwork most of the time. And I don't see why they're not working with these kids in groups, because they don't have time for individual parents and individual groups. I think that has to be a major change. The other thing is, if these kids can read, I have them read the book. And I suggest to parents, they say, well, I couldn't get my kid to read the book. And I said, just try. Just go to them and say, you know, I read this book, and I want to apologize to you. If this is the truth, you're not making anything up. There are so many things I could have done better, and I didn't. I'd like you to read it, and then we'll discuss it. Maybe we can start over, and both of us can learn. That may have an impact on them.
I certainly appreciate what you're saying, particularly as a minister, and I believe the churches have to take a more active role in doing the things that is necessary to help families and continuing to bring them together. So the information that I have gathered here is certainly something that I will be taking back and I will be using and implementing in my own church.
Right.
Thank you.
Ask them, they'll help you.
Well, again, thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much, Dr. Newmark and Mrs. Deborah Newmark. Thank you very much. It's a really very valuable experience. Go ahead.